Yellow and Red makes by Digits 27, Chapter 62. Both Naruto and Yu were smiling as they finally got the opportunity to stretch their legs in earnest as they dashed across the desert, using what they knew of the terrain to make it across quickly. Finally, they saw the strangely obvious border between the land of wind and the land of rain, made more blatantly by the light rain that began to fall around them. The two of them made more cautious and steady progress after that, traveling as civilians would to keep suspicion off of them. Naruto was already amazed by the variety they saw from the new country. Despite the ever-present rainfall, people went about their lives. There were a few sparsely populated villages spread out through the outskirts of the city, mostly farms and rice paddies. The geography itself was also quite varied. Hills, valleys, streams, and rivers dotted the lands, and Naruto could even make out the vague shape of a mountain range in the distance. However, despite the beauty of the country around them, both shinobi couldn't help but feel it was damped by the weather. Used to living in a desert where water was a commodity almost as valuable as gold. The two just weren't used to seeing as so much rain, even if they hadn't always lived in Suna. The natives seemed indifferent to it, or strangely, in some cases, grateful for some reason. The two were on an information gathering mission, so they asked discreet questions every now and then. Most of the time, the people were fairly guarded, but it was in vain anyway. Apparently, the flow of information was tightly controlled from Agakure itself, as many people still believed Hanzo to be in control. The two gave up believing that either the people were playing dumb in hopes that they would move on, or generally didn't know anything. In either case, they figured their search would be more fruitful in the village itself. Not that they thought the infiltration of a foreign village was going to be easy. The charge on through the country, their respective spirits becoming more oppressed by the ceaseless and seemingly worsening rain. The darkened the sky and flooded the roads, even if they were incredibly irrigated. That was another thing now to notice, that it wasn't all that prevalent in the outlying villages, but as they drew closer to the capital, he began seeing the strange architecture of the country. It became painfully obvious when the two finally rounded the crest of a hill, only to look on in slight awe at the sight in front of them. The rain-swept city of Amagakure no Sato, tall, spindly towers of metal climbing into the air, each seemingly competing with those closest to it, like trees in the forest. Everywhere you looked, there was piping, taking away the rain that fell constantly and safely transporting it through the city's massive sewer system. In all, Naruto thought it reminded him of what his mindscape used to look like if it was a city instead of an underground sewer. In fact, it was almost uncanny. The two stayed there for a while, discussing the best entrances into the village while simultaneously deciding that the main entrance was out. They may have been discreet and almost non-existent in the rest of the country, but the shinobi presence in Ami itself was more than obvious. They seemed well organized and well trained, performing routine checks on everybody on entering or leaving the village through the conventional ways. It was just a good thing that Naruto wasn't a very conventional person. If citizens of Agakure had looked up at that particular day, they might have seen a lonely falcon flying fiercely through the downpour that pervaded their lives. It dodged through the tall, haphazardly designed buildings, using the darkness provided by the cloud coverage to mask its flight. It settled down in the most deserted alleyway you could find, floating down to a grateful stop on the ground. If anyone had looked close, they might have noticed the strange patterns drawn on the creature's back in what seemed to be ink. Suddenly, the entire bird just glowed. For a moment before, there was a large burst of smoke, and two shadows were blasted into the darkened alley quite forcefully. The two took a moment to catch their bearings, looking rather dazed from the unorthodox transport before standing up and checking their surroundings quickly. Finally, the slightly shorter of the two made sure to smack her partner around the back of his head before dispelling her summon. And make sure I never let you talk me into traveling by sealing scroll ever again, okay? Letter just nodded with a sheepish smile. He hadn't really thought it would be that bad in honesty. He just applied the same principle he did with his Fuji no Iki, using the technique that allowed him to seal chakra in order to create a space where they could teleport to temporarily hide him. Well, it worked, didn't it? And it's not like we haven't been that close before. He tried to placate her, but the irritation in her eyes were quite clear. There's a fucking difference between close and fucking crushed together in a space the size of a fucking closet. Naruto quickly raised a finger to his lips, signaling to you to quiet down as he motioned to the end of the alley that they were in. Even now, the sounds of the city life echoed through the more constant sound of rain pattering down on the street or into the piping system. Taiya sighed and nodded. She might have been stubborn and free-spirited, but she understood when subtlety and tact were required, and recon missions were such times. They both quietly walked out into the streets, instantly blending in with the crowds with their nondescript rain slickers and covered hair. Both of them had left behind anything that might have identified themselves as shinobi or foreigners. As far as Naruto knew, there wasn't really any single nationality from Ame, or at least one that was vastly different to Suna. The only thing that might distinguish them was their tan skin, as most people in Ame were relatively pale, most likely from the constant clouds that smothered the sky. Taiya fixed that by weaving a slight genjutsu about the two of them, simultaneously lightening their skin and removing Naruto's whiskers. For all they knew, that they were in enemy territory right now, and they were the single most identifiable factor about Naruto that might give him away. As they moved through the village, they couldn't help but be slightly intimidated by the imposing architecture. Not that they showed it. It was quite different than anything they were used to, as they knew villages to be quite low and spread out, while Ame was relatively small but stretched into the sky. When they were alone, Naruto created clones that hinged into various random civilians before spreading out through the village. They would listen in to conversations and dispel to give Naruto the information they gained. To you was there if the need for interrogation ever came up, and she found her knack for that working under Satori. It turned out that people were quite loose with their tongues if they believed their body was slowly melting away beneath them. After half a day of walking around and not getting any useful information, the two of them stopped off at a small restaurant, out of the way enough that they probably wouldn't ask many questions. They gave a small smile to the woman working behind the counter of the little shop, which was returned by a slight curt version. They ignored the somewhat unfriendly gestures and ordered some food, both of them not really having much to say to the other at the moment. Naruto kept glancing around as his gaze passed across the strange paper idol hanging on the wall where it wouldn't be dampened by the rain. He remembered that his clone had seen similar paper idols dotted around the village in various establishments, like the one they were eating in. Now that he actually looked at it closely, he realized it somewhat resembled a person, at least if they had wings and a halo. Excuse me, but I've noticed these paper dolls around the village. What do they mean? The woman stared at him for a moment with furrowed brows, while Naruto quickly clarified him. My girlfriend and I are visiting family in the village. We're from one of the smaller villages on the border of the land of wind. The woman continued to stare before nodding with a small frown. However, when her gaze flitted to the paper idol on the wall, a tiny smile lit up her face for a moment. It's a sign of God's angel, letting us know she is always watching over us for him. Naruto gave a bemused smile, but nodded all the same, knowing when not to press for information if he didn't want one to seem suspicious. The two finished their meal shortly afterwards, thanking the woman before pulling up the hoods of their anoraks and stepping back out into the rain. They looked around for a moment before Taiya turned to Naruto, who just seemed to be looking off into the distance. So what now? Naruto pointed off towards the other side of the street, where a sign stood on a metal pole with various directions to the sites around the city. How about God's Tower? To check out this stuff about the angel? And you just nodded. It wasn't like they had any other leads at the moment, and usually the largest buildings were the most important, so they could probably get some information anyway. Yeah, sure. When you had mentioned the large buildings being important, she definitely did not have this in mind. The tower was positively enormous, stretched so high into the sky that it hurted to crane their necks at the angle required to see the spire high above them. They could only imagine why Magakure would need a tower so high, even if they hadn't noticed it before now. Somehow, taking a deep breath, they hesitantly tried the front doors, actually shocked when they swung open without much protest. And they hadn't noticed that despite the looks of admiration from the villagers aimed at both the tower and the angel edifices, people seemed to be avoiding the tower entirely. That was true for the inside as well. It was more barren than a stretch of the Sudan desert. Nato found himself strangely happy that the inside of the building did not match the outside. It maintained its neo-Gothic style, but the construction seemed less random, and there were no pipes of ferrying rainwater every which way. Right now, they were at somewhat of a loss at what to do. They hadn't been expecting the building to be empty, and made finding anything somewhat difficult. Luckily or unluckily, depending on viewpoint and hindsight, the problem was solved fairly quickly. The winds inside the room suddenly picked up as papers that appeared out of the wall themselves suddenly flocked together in the center of the room. Naruto was instantly thrown back 10 years to when the exact same thing had happened during his attempted escape from some bandits. In a few seconds, the paper took on a human form before solidifying, gaining color, and slowly becoming more distinct until a half-formed woman floated in the center of the room. Her skin, clothes, and blue hair all still looked like they were composed of paper, flaking ever so slightly. Her body just ended at a certain point in her robes, becoming more loose sheaves of paper that floated a few feet from the ground. The most remarkable thing were the two large wings, also made of paper, that extended from her back and truly giving her the appearance of an angel. Konoha, the blue-haired woman only offered a fleeting smile. Hello, Naruto. It's been a long time. The blonde could only stare at the woman in shock and disbelief. She was the one who saved his life all those years ago. She was also the reason he had met Yuya, who he now couldn't imagine life without. Except for Gara, Fu, Yuya, and Kuruma, she probably had the single greatest impact on his life for the better. And now she was standing in front of him as a member of the Katsuki and his enemy. But why? The blue-haired woman just offered a sad smile, which was soon swallowed by her usual impassive mask. I might be able to explain to your past the reason why we fight for a vision of peace, but it would be better to hear it from someone else, someone who you will understand. She floated slowly to the ground, her legs reappearing as her paper form became more and more solid, and her wings dissipated as the individual sheets of paper flew away around the building as little paper airplanes. Naruto and Tio weren't sure what to think, and Konan was supposed to be their enemy, but right now in front of them, she was lowering her guard. After a moment of hesitation, Naruto relaxed, drawing his body out of its well-conditioned fighting stance. Tio shot him a wary look, but he just shrugged, and Konoha had saved his life all those years ago. The least he could do was give her the benefit of the doubt this once. Gara had told him to avoid unnecessary conflict, and that was exactly what he was doing. Taya just sighed as she replaced the bow staff she had drawn on her back, and also relaxed her body. All right, lead the way. And Konoha nodded with a small and weary smile before turning on a heel and walking down one of the corridors. Taya and Naruto warily followed her, but not before the blonde quickly applied a Fuji no Iki seal to the floor of the foyer. They jogged to catch up to the woman walking beside her, but staying out of her reach just in case. Naruto was ready at any moment to activate his swift release in response to even the slightest signs of a trap, and Konoha noticed the tension in their postures. I assure you that under this roof, no harm will come to you, and the god of Ame has decided it is time you and he met. Naruto furrowed his brow as he continued to walk alongside her. The god of Ame? You mean the leader of the Katsuki? And Konoha nodded quickly, walking along in silence. Naruto did as well, but his mind was clouded by confusing thoughts and memories. When you saved me all those years ago, were you part of the Katsuki? And Konoha nodded again, a short, curt movement. Then why? Why save me when you knew what I was? Konoha just smirked in amusement before the momentary gesture was swallowed by the mask again. Katsuki was not always as it is today. Our goal was never always to seek out the Biju. Not deferred, his brow wondered what had caused them to change their mind. As I said, there's someone who could explain it better. And she turned her head to look right at him once again, letting him see her eyes to shine orange for a fraction of a second. When I saved you, I had no idea what you were. You were an orphan. That was all I needed to know. And she returned to staring ahead at the corridor in front of them, letting silence wash over them. Eventually, after winding their way through the extensive tower and climbing what seemed like an infinite number of stairs, the three of them entered a large chamber. Right in the center was a large machine supporting a frail and emaciated man with long red hair falling across his face and a limp sheet. His body was thin and his bones were visible beneath his skin. The machine he was in seemingly restrained him or more likely supported him at the arms and legs, giving him a slightly hunched over appearance. Most strange were the many large black rods sticking directly out of the man's back, which Naruto instinctively knew were the same as those Pain had used as weapons. Naruto Uzumaki. It's almost ironic, really. His voice was gravelly, not unlike Goddess, but his words held more emotion. They were also slightly deeper. Ironic that in the end, my vision for peace was stopped by my own blood. Another time, we might have been friends, family even. It was only a few words, but already Naruto's eyes widened as his slightly tense fist hung limply to his side. Do you hate me, Naruto? The blonde just trembled, unsure what to say. I don't know you. The man blinked slowly, taking time to process the information as his face remained set in a mask of sadness that clung to him like a cloak. I am Nagato Uzumaki, war orphan of Ame, student of Jiraiya of the Sun, and murderer of Hanzo of the Salamanders. You would know me as the current leader of the organization Akatsuki. Notice's eyes widened even further. Of course, he knew the man might be lying, and that it might all be a ploy to lower his guard. But here he was, standing across from possibly the only blood family he truly had left in the world. Uzumaki? How? Then Nagato looked up. His rippled eyes were now clearly visible as he gained a small gasp of recognition from both teens. My mother was a refugee from Uzigakure, although I did not know that for many years after her murder at the hands of a leaf shinobi. Nagato's fist clenched back into paws. He was an orphan like him. My Rinnegan Dojutsu you see in my eyes activated that day. Since then it has been a curse and a blessing giving me power. He looked down at the machine that supported him for a moment as he paused. And crippling my body. Naruto understood the burden of power that was both dangerous and powerful, something he had no control over. In so many ways he and Nagato were alike, yet they had gone down such different paths. How? Nagato looked up at Naruto, their eyes meeting for a moment before Naruto continued. How did he get to this? You of all people should know the pain and misery that the violence brings, yet you want to hurt those because of something that they had no control over. People like me, or Gaara, and Fu, we never wanted to be jerky, but we make do, finding precious bonds where we can just to keep living, having to prove to the world that we aren't the so-called demons we contain. Nagato blinked slowly, once again absorbed what the young Uzumaki was telling him. Your friends, they are important to you, aren't they? You would do anything for them, even sacrifice yourself for them, because you believe in them and what they stand for, because you care for them more than anything else in the world. Naruto just nodded slowly as Nagato continued. I too had bonds like that once, and precious people that meant the world to me. The war took that away from me. Greedy men who understood nothing of pain and suffering, who didn't understand the lives they were destroying as they quarreled over petty grievances. Conan looked away at this point, her mask finally breaking as a small tear found its way to the corner of her eye. This is how the world will know peace. Once everyone understands true pain, true suffering, through fear, then they will know the consequences of war. Naruto frowned as his fist shook him. How could you think that? What makes you any better than them? If you plan on killing so many, how many has Takashi killed already in this plan for peace? Hundreds? Thousands? I may not know Jiraiya very well, but that can't be the dream he wants. People have to understand each other, find bonds through the love that can defeat their hate. Nagato sighed deeply as the machine around him moved so he could better look at Naruto. You are young, and while you think you have experienced suffering, you still maintain that naivety. It is a fool's dream. People will always harbor hatred, always experience greed and anger. That is what makes such bonds special in the first place, and also why losing them devastates lives. Natahange said, letting his unrestrained hair fall over his eyes. I understand that you must have lost somebody precious to you, that your life was probably even harder than mine, but that's no reason to give up on humanity. You should fight harder to save it. Nagato let out a humorless chuckle, his frail body shaking from the minute exertion. Your words are inspirational. You carry the spirit of our clan, but people are not changed in a day. Words alone will not change the hearts of men. I hate war. It took everything from me, and I loathe the world that allowed it to happen. That will not change. In honesty, a part of me hopes you are right. That you can find a way to peace that I could not see in my hatred cloud vision. I'm sad that I may never live to see it. He hung his head sadly, although it wasn't much of a change from the normal expression. My body's weak. My abuse of power has taken its toll, and even the strength of the Uzumaki blood that flows through both of our veins cannot help me. I will die soon, leaving the world with nothing more than my legacy, the destruction I have wrought through my paths, and my singular attempts at attaining peace. A small smile finally graced the older man's lips. His gaunt cheeks turning up slightly at the gesture so unfamiliar to his face. Good luck in your own path to peace, to Naruto. I once asked you to look after a young orphan, purely because I didn't want to see another lonely girl have to to grow up in a world that she would one day come to despise. I wanted you to save one person from the life that I lived. He turned and looked straight at you as she looked back at the man who had brought Naruto to her, giving her life meaning, however indirectly. And you have done exactly that. Even if I die tomorrow, I die knowing that my actions have at least brought one person happiness. That would be what Yahiko would have wanted. But why do you have to die? Let someone help you. I'm sure Tsunade would. And then Nagato looked up, letting his rippled eyes gaze directly into Naruto's own, piercing him and making the blonde stop mid-sentence. That's enough, Naruto. My time is coming to a close. I wanted to talk because I wanted to see how you would react to the cause of your pains of being right in front of you. You have shown me compassion despite being your enemy. You have shown me tolerance in letting me tell my story, and you have shown me understanding, even if it was in a slight naive way. If there's anybody that can achieve what I could not, then I believe it would be you. Jiraiya Sensei once told us something right before he left, that even though we weren't from Konoha, we carried in us the will of fire. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I believe I see that in you now. I'll do it. And then Nagato looked up in surprise and narrowed his eyes in Naruto's direction. If there's no way to try peace, and you're right, then I'll make one. As long as there are people in this world that are worth protecting, and that believe in me and will support me, I'll never give up. I won't just do it for them. I'll do it for you too. Nagato let out a small gasp of surprise. I want you to see that you're wrong. I want you to live to see the peace that Jiraiya wanted so much, and that's a promise. Nagato blinked slowly before closing his eyes and exhaling softly in a sigh. You can help people. Use your power to stop wars and end suffering instead of causing it by hunting the jerky. I know you could be healed. I'm sure Lady Tsunade could do it. And if she won't, then I'll make her. The tears had begun to gather at the edge of Naruto's eyes. We're so alike. Our lives are like the same story, told with different characters. And you're the last family I have. I would be dishonor in my family if I did nothing to help you. Please, let me help you. Naruto looked down, staring at his own frail body, the machine that was the only thing keeping him upright. Your eyes, even in all this confusion, all this hate and suffering that surrounds our lives, your eyes are clear. In all my pain and hatred towards the world, I forgot the Jiraiya Sensei taught me. The very spirit you seem to have found on your own. He sighed again as he looked down at Konan to his side. It seems that even with the eyes of the sage of the six paths, I was blind. Maybe you can see more clearly than the Renegon. The smallest of smiles tweaked at the edge of his mouth. Maybe it would not be so terrible to finally try and let the hate go. He turned, the machine once again allowing him to move his body to look down at Konan. I'm sorry, Konan. Yaka would never have wanted this. I failed him. The normally emotionless woman stared at her old friend in a small amount of shock and amazement. Nagato, she sighed. He would have understood. He always understood. Nagato nodded slowly and sadly as thoughts of his oldest friend flashed through his mind. He gulped and took a deep breath as he turned back to where Naruto stood. Naruto, please help me. Naruto stared across at the silent blue-haired woman, which is calmly staring back. Neither of them backing down as they held the other's gaze. They had been forced to move to another room while Taiyo went over the damage to Naruto's body, and preferably Naruto wanted Tsunade to help him, but Taiyo had pointed out that it would be pointless if she could help him. She may not have been a medic on par with Tsunade herself, but she was good in her own way, in her own unorthodox way. Only if she felt that she could do nothing for him, could they consider asking Tsunade for help. He was still technically the enemy after all. What happened? Konan was surprised when Naruto finally broke the tense silence that had filled the air around them. What do you mean? Naruto sighed, looking in the direction of the chamber where Naruto and Taiyo were. What happened to make him this way? He looked back at Konan again. To make you this way? The brunette blinked rapidly for a moment, processing the unexpected question. She seemed hesitant to answer, but after a few seconds of Naruto continuing to pour into her with his bottomless blue eyes, she relented. Naruto wasn't always the leader of the Katsuki. That position once belonged to our friend, Yahiko. We grew up together ever since the war drove us from our families, like our own little family. He had a dream, the dream that Naruto believed he was still following until today. He wanted to bring peace to our home. He formed the Katsuki to aid him in that dream. He called it Red Dawn because that was our goal, to see the rains finally lift from our home. Naruto nodded slowly, knowing that this Yahiko was very important to her, in the way her voice was catching ever so often was an indicator. The previous leader of our village, Hanzo the Salamander, the man who named the Sanin after they held their own against him, he retaliated against our group. She looked away from him in shame for a moment before dragging her eyes back over to his. He captured me, held me hostage while Yahiko and Nagato could only look on. He promised them that I would be released safely if Nagato killed Yahiko. He refused, holding out a kunai in trembling hands, unable to do it, unable to kill his best friend. Nagato just nodded with a frown, horrified by the decision Nagato was forced to go through with. He couldn't do it. Wouldn't. She looked away again, tears beginning to become evident in the corners of her eyes as she relived those horrible moments of her life. But Yahiko, he would never want to see anybody hurt because of him. He was the most selfless man I ever knew. He drove himself onto Nagato's kunai, killing himself, but not before passing on his dream. After that, Nagato killed them all, killed them all. All the shinobi Hanzo had with him. The man himself escaped, but later on, Nagato, but by now she was sobbing, and Naruto couldn't help but place a comforting hand on her shoulder. At the contact, Konan immediately sobered. A lifetime of hiding her emotions and covering up behind the mask was hard to break. She sat a little straighter, wiping the tears from her eyes as she drew away from Naruto's touch. Hesitantly, he withdrew his hand, not knowing if what he did helped her or not, but respecting her wishes all the same. Konan, the paper angel looked up, her eyes now slightly red from her tears. The night you saved me, the night you entrusted me to Taiyo. He pulled up the sleeve of his jacket and showed her the small pink petal mark that to this day he had yet to fade him. Why did you give me this? Konan chuckled slightly, glad for the distraction from her previous tears. She waved her hand over the mark and let Naruto watch in amazement as thousands of miscellaneous shards of paper, probably no larger than the width of a hair, were drawn out from the mark until it was gone entirely. How did you expect me to make sure you were keeping your promise? End of chapter 62.